we've covered a lot of ground. I've talked about maintenance philosophy and about taxpayer money for private infrastructure. And now we'll cover trust, inspection, and safety. Safety meaning a detailed analysis of Norfolk Southern's 6-point safety plan, which they published shortly after the East Palestine incident. Trust but verify is a Reagan-era strategic missile negotiating phrase. It means always check to be sure what's been promised actually happens. So much is riding on the railroad's words and plans. We think verification is crucial, and we want to share one example. Norfolk Southern was legally required to convey the impact of their planned construction to affected communities. A key step was an open house a few months ago. Railroad staff and engineering consultants were there to answer questions, and large posters showed a before and after view of each project. Here's the Washington Avenue crossing in Swissvale. The bottom after image is the top photo cropped to make the bridge look taller and wider. You can see the weeds were airbrushed out and the rails are now shiny. Also, the color of the gravel was changed. On closer look at the before picture, we can count the blocks in the retaining wall labeled C. There's one tall course of block atop two shorter courses. It's important you know this bridge was not being raised. The track will be lowered nearly 2 feet. In the after photo, the retaining wall is unchanged, which means track height hasn't changed either. There's a stain on the bottom block that's in the exact same place relative to the track bed. On this after photo, there's one more detail, an artificial shadow drawn to suggest a downward sloping embankment. It's an illusion. Most important, we measured the height, the distance, not just from the bridge to the top of the rails, but the ratio of bridge height to bridge width. It's the same in both photos. The track hasn't been moved. How important is this revelation? The railroad that's negotiating with our city and state officials on permits and rules which play a huge role in determining the future of Pittsburgh, not to mention the health and safety of our citizens, promised to illustrate the impact of the plan changes. They spent a lot on these presentations, plus staff and outside engineers paid to attend the session. What we needed was the truth. We got smoke and mirrors. It does not bode well. Hence, trust but verify. Our look at inspection will be brief. Glenn and I asked for records of maintenance and inspections for Merchant Street and Fort Wayne. Norfolk Southern, through its consultants, declined. We were also surprisingly rejected by state officials, citing, quote, security and safety considerations of the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, close quote. What it means is that we can't know the safety of a bridge because sharing this information would jeopardize the safety of the bridge. It's Orwellian. On Merchant Street, the railroad had already published a report identifying extensive corrosion and many other defects. That report, with photos and metallurgical studies, called the bridge unsatisfactory at the end of its useful life and said its poor condition could cause injuries or property damages within the next few years. These printed admissions made security concerns an untimely and feeble excuse. We just wanted to know what the prior report said and when. Bridge conditions had been revealed in detail. Learning how long these problems were known to Norfolk Southern could teach us whether they can be trusted to keep its infrastructure and the public safe. We maintain the public deserves to know and think the FAST Act is being misapplied in this instance. The actual law says some local officials can get a, quote, public version, close quote, of an inspection, but will only see the date and a general statement on the condition of the bridge. That's it. Given that the FRA, the Federal Railroad Administration, only inspects a tiny fraction of the nation's rail bridges and track each year, we need legislation that will A, allocate resources to the FRA for this purpose, and B, find practicable ways to involve city, county, and state governments in monitoring rail infrastructure safety in their jurisdictions. Remember that the Merchant Street Bridge didn't get this way overnight. It was neglected for many years, many decades. Pennsylvania has more working railroads than any other state and 5,600 miles of track. Pittsburgh has more bridges than any place on earth, so we're biased, but we think there are more rail bridges here too. To our knowledge, no one has a complete inventory, which makes it impossible to completely monitor their safety. When Fern Hollow collapsed and most dangerous bridge lists appeared everywhere, we never saw the Fort Wayne mentioned. We don't think rail-only bridges are tracked. That's untenable. We suggest the FRA be required to complete a catalog of these structures, keep records current, and share the data with state transportation departments. We'll now look at the Norfolk Southern 6-point safety plan, announced shortly after their incident in East Palestine. Their first point is add detectors. It's a good thing. They're adding 200 detectors, but where they'll go is unclear. Norfolk Southern says it's in the core network. This is the Norfolk Southern network. If they've publicly defined what comprises the core, we can't find it. And what about those rail towns like East Palestine, not in the core? How are they going to be protected? Practical is subjective, and we can't imagine where it would be impractical to install detectors. They mention terrain, but rail beds by their nature are flat. If a location is isolated and in the hills, there's solar for power and satellites for signal. What's the problem? 200 detectors sounds great until you realize that's a little better than 1 per 100 miles. 14-mile spacing in the core doesn't impress. And what about the rest of the network? And what do 200 detectors cost? The number of miles between detectors means nothing by itself. You must know train speed. If equipment is overheating or on fire, how long it takes to reach the next detector is critical. Spacing in urban areas like ours, where trains run much slower, must be much closer together than in the country. What is the railroad plan? We don't know. Finally, does anyone think folks in East Palestine are sleeping better knowing they'll get the first detector? This is insulting. Next gen anything sounds exciting. What does it mean? Possibly the first thing it means is don't count on it anytime soon. If the railroad is accelerating, what was the timetable before and how has it improved? To be credible, Norfolk Southern must share who their partners are. We know how much money the railroad makes each year. What are they spending on new safety technology? How many of their staff have they tasked to this project? They don't say. And we know vibration detection gives earlier warnings. Why isn't that the next generation? With trains stretching to 3 miles and hundreds of cars, they should be building detectors that pinpoint problems instead of making their 2 onboard workers, 1 worker, if they get their wish, jog the length of the train to locate a failed bearing. How many times in many contexts have we heard reevaluating and reviewing best practices from people who actually plan to do nothing? That may not be the case here, but there's no evidence of activity. No time frame has been given, and conclusions could be slow. In this case, why not just lower the threshold at which alarms sound? That takes no time. That takes no money. Based on results to date, it looks like 170 degrees above ambient temperature is too high for stop and inspect. And 200 degrees is certainly too high for take the car out of service. I'd like to see them err on the side of safety and lower these set points. When more and smarter detectors have been developed and are installed and networked, the railroad will have much better information. Then they can raise the alarm threshold. Acoustic detectors. It's great that there's some advanced technology already in the field. How long have their 5 acoustic detectors been in service? We have no idea. How have they performed compared to heat detectors? We have no clue. When will the 13 new detectors be installed? Again, where and how big is their core network? And if acoustic detectors work better, why are they only planning 1 for every 1,072 miles? It's embarrassing. Finally, what does an acoustic detector cost? $10,000, $100,000, $1 million? $100,000 seems generous for a single detector, and that would mean they're investing $1.3 million across their whole system. Reports say they've already spent almost $400 million on the East Palestine cleanup alone. How is this meager response commensurate? Do they not believe that an ounce of prevention equals a pound of cure? Here we find next gen, machine vision, algorithms, and AI. Definite A+ on buzzwords. It's great that they're developing the next gen with Georgia Tech. How big is this program? What are its goals? They don't say. If they're developing next gen safety inspection technology now, why not begin deploying the current gen that already exists while their development program proceeds? Again, they're accelerating, but from what timetable and to what timetable? When will installation of this new equipment start? When will it finish? How long is their premier corridor? How is it different than the core network? What percent of the premier corridor will be protected? Not a clue. How much money have they pledged to this development program? And when the next gen AI system is ready, how many human inspectors will it replace? And finally, culture. Culture is important. We're glad Norfolk Southern is joining the FRA safety reporting system. But if this is something that they're already doing, they should share how it's working. When was it started? How many railroaders have already used the company program? How many close calls have been reported each year? And how many pieces of equipment were pulled from service based on these close call reports? We know nothing. All these things make great sound bites. They're designed to mollify critics and give the appearance of sincere commitment and progressive action. I submit that's all this safety plan represents. The list includes one specific item, 13 acoustic detectors, but no delivery date. There is not one named manufacturing partner. There is not one pledge of either money or staff resources. Of the 6 points in this alleged safety plan, there isn't one meaningful commitment in the bunch. Norfolk Southern needs to do better, much better. Again, this is how they view their operations. And again, I have my own personal view. And remember, this is parity. To close, let's return to Merchant Street, the crash in 1934. The Interstate Commerce Commission's extensive report at the time documented the accident, quote, was caused by excessive speed on a sharp curve, close quote. Evidence showed the speed limit on the curve before the bridge was 25, but the train was doing 60. The air-operated brakes, the same Civil War era technology railroads refuse to modernize today, checked out fine. So was human error involved? Obviously. Yet the report strongly suggests this crash too could have been prevented. The director of the ICC Bureau of Safety said this, quote, "At the present time, automatic cab signals are in use on this railroad between New York and Washington and between Baltimore and Indianapolis. Approaching the point of accident, there were 3 signals which displayed restrictive indications. Had cab signal devices been in service here of the type used on other parts of this railroad, restrictive indications would have been displayed in the cab and a whistle sounded when they changed. If not acknowledged, the whistle would have continued, warning the fireman that something was wrong and prompting him to ensure the safety of his train. No such protection is provided by this railroad from Pittsburgh to Chicago. This is high-speed territory, and the carrier should give careful consideration for additional protection." Nearly 100 years have passed, and it's the same story. Technology is readily available, which can prevent catastrophic rail accidents. It works where it's installed, but it's not widely adopted by the industry because it takes capital to implement improvements. And companies sometimes defer such investment even where public safety is concerned, as they'd rather increase profits. A century later, and we're still letting private industry make this call. It's time to change. It's time for serious legislation governing railroad operations. It's time to give the FRA the resources it needs to inspect and to enforce. And it's time to make sure this agency isn't controlled by ex-employees of and ex-lobbyists for private railroads. We need a watchdog concerned only with the public good, not the bottom line. Legislators, we'd love to work with you to craft more potent oversight and pragmatic enforcement for this industry. Everyone else, build on our momentum by signing the petition to close the loopholes. Again, the link is in the chat. Thanks for your attention.